Hello and welcome back everyone to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Sheppard. It is good to have you guys. We should have a very thrilling show ahead for you guys, as we will be highlighting a lot of different sports, some debuts for some sports in this episode. We'll start off obviously with the NHL. We have a game tonight in the Western Conference Finals between the Oilers and the Stars, so we'll talk to you about that. Then, for the first time ever on the show, we are going to be looking at the beautiful game. Yes, football, jogo bonito, not soccer as we call it here. Footy will be featured. We'll be going over the Euros betting odds, ranking the top 10 there. We'll also be looking at another ranking in terms of fantasy college football. We're rounding out with the tight ends. And we're also going to debut WNBA, specifically the Rookie of the Year debate and the betting odds there. And last but not least, we're going to do a Wolves-Mavs finals Western Conference Finals recap, to sum up what was a fantastic series for the duo that is Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, so it should be a very exciting show. But before we begin, as always, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show. It does mean a lot. Also, do think about considering leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support not only to the network, but to me and my fellow podcasters, so anything that you leave there is greatly appreciated. You can also leave a question for me if you want a question answered at the beginning of the next episode, but that is always a thing that you could consider, so please consider that. Now, going into today's show, we start off, like I said, with the Western Conference Finals game tonight between the Oilers and the Stars in the NHL. Last night, some of the guys I mentioned in the Panthers-Rangers series over in the Eastern Conference performed well. It's like Sam Bennett, he had an empty net goal last night. So I'm looking to continue my hot streak of nice fantasy predictions going into tonight's game between the Oilers and the Stars. Now, looking back at last game, Chris Knoblauch, the coach for the Oilers, like he has done all season, has proven that he is willing to adjust to whatever a team throws at him. And last game, he had a masterstroke replacing some players that were already established in the lineup with guys like Corey Perry and Ryan McLeod, who I'll talk about a little bit later in the segment. But overall, what a performance by the Edmonton Oilers to even this series, proving that they can take any team's best punch and really turn something that perhaps they weren't expecting, like going down early by 2 goals within 5 minutes of the first period, and turning it into a fantastic win that will rejuvenate them heading into this Game 5 that is so pivotal right now. But first off, I want to highlight my fantasy players, continue my hot streak like I said. Let's start off with a guy who you're probably going to think I'm crazy for even mentioning on this show, but was a huge part of the win in Game 4 for Edmonton. How about Darnell Nurse? Now, I know what you're thinking. Darnell Nurse is certainly not the best of defensemen in the NHL, but he has been one of the longest tenured Oilers on this squad. He knows what it takes to win series. He has seen not only the Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid era for most of its inception, but he's also been there before them, and he knows how dire the straits were for the Oilers back then. So Darnell Nurse has been through the ringer for the Edmonton Oilers. Coming into this game, he's valued at $4K in DraftKings. He only is expected to have 5.1 fantasy points. He only has 1 assist this series. However, last game, let's talk about it. He was on the ice for both goals, and it certainly looked like it was going to be one of those Darnell Nurse performances where he was going to disappoint people yet again. But in a fantastic turnaround for him, he had one of his best games, not only of the playoffs, but his entire career. And it just goes to show that Darnell Nurse is ready to break through to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time, because he's not seen as a guy who is headliner for the Edmonton Oilers. He's always taken the back seat to Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, and also as a defenseman, he might not be seen as much value as them. But overall, I think that Darnell Nurse proved last game that he still has it in him to put on a defensive clinic. And tonight, I expect him to also be pivotal, depending on how Chris Knoblauch plays this out. So look for him as well. Also, another guy I mentioned for the Edmonton Oilers, Ryan McLeod. Chris Knoblauch brings him into the squad. He had a goal last game, and he is honestly going to be expected to do a lot more in this series, should this series go the distance. I think that Ryan McLeod is definitely going to be one of those guys who is going to be relied upon come Game 7 if it gets there, because of the fact that Chris Knoblauch needs to continue to adapt to what the Stars throw at him. And so Ryan McLeod is going to be a huge asset. Tonight, he's only valued at 2.6K on DraftKings, only projected to have 2 fantasy points. So this is another one of those crazy out there predictions that I have for you guys. But I honestly, going forward, I think that Ryan McLeod is going to be one of those players that Chris Knoblauch rotates in and out of the Oilers lineup. He is on the first penalty kill unit. One of the best aspects of this Edmonton Oilers team is their penalty kill, and I think that's especially important against a team like Dallas, who is so potent on the power play. So look for Ryan McLeod to have another huge game for the Edmonton Oilers, should Chris Knoblauch trust him going forward in this best of 3 kind of duke it out series going on. On the Stars side of things, we've obviously talked a lot about how the Stars have so much balance at every position. I've literally gone through almost their entire lineup from defense to offense, but I want to highlight 2 guys who I haven't really spoken about and who I think kind of need to step up to the plate for Dallas if they want to win this series, because Edmonton is right now has all the momentum in my opinion. Let's start off with a guy in Thomas Harley, sitting in that second defensive pairing for the Dallas Stars. A player who really had big shoes to fill. This is only his second full season playing in the league, and he has had a fantastic season for the Stars. But in the postseason, especially in this series when he's going up against an Edmonton team that's going to throw a lot of different offensive looks at him, he needs to step up his game. And in this particular Game 5, I'm looking for Thomas Harley not to necessarily score goals, because he's not that much of a goal-scoring threat, but I'm looking for him to add value if you're in a league that values hits, potentially there. He's very strong in that department there. Going into tonight, he's valued at 4.3K on DraftKings, projected to have 4.7 fantasy points tonight. I think that Thomas Harley, a lot was expected of him. Coming into the Stars, he had to fill one of the best Stars defensemen in recent years' shoes in John Klingberg, and I think that coming into the series, he has performed admirably throughout the postseason, but he hasn't really had a breakout game in the conference final series that means so much to both Dallas and Edmonton. So I'm looking for him to, like I said, not be that goal-scoring guy, but more of a utility option for your daily fantasy hockey team tonight. So look for him to be a nice little sleeper pick for your daily fantasy hockey team. Coming in for the second choice for me from the Stars tonight, I'm looking at Mason Marchment. Hasn't really had a breakout game, sitting in the second line pairing for the Dallas Stars. He definitely has the potential to be one of those players for the Stars to look at going forward offensively, but this past series he only has 1 goal. That came in Game 2 for Dallas. So I'm really looking for him to, in these final 3 games of this series, I'm looking for him to really step up to the plate, because he is a second line forward for Dallas, and he really needs to be one of those guys that melds the offensive mindset with the defensive mindset. He's coming in valued at 3.6K, 5.6 fantasy points projected. I think that Mason Marchment is going to need to have a huge game for the Stars, because they can't just rely on guys like Wyatt Johnston, who's still young, and Jason Robertson. Obviously, I talked about those guys in prior episodes, but I need some new blood for the Dallas Stars to continue to score in order for them to win this series, because right now, like I said, Edmonton is on a high from that energetic Game 4 win. They split the both games that they had at home after they kind of took home ice advantage away from the Stars in the first two games of the series. Now going back to Dallas, I'm really intrigued to see how this series plays out, mainly due to the fact that Chris Knoblauch took the initiative to implement guys like Ryan McLeod and entrust guys like Darnell Nurse with the burden of leading Edmonton to the Stanley Cup Finals. And I really am intrigued to see how Rick Bowness adapts to that as well. Actually, or rather, Peter DeBoer, the coach of the Dallas Stars, how he adapts to what Chris Knoblauch is doing. And ultimately, I think Game 5 is going to be one of the most exciting playoff games we've had in this postseason. I think it's going to be high scoring, energetic. The pace of the game is going to be very fast, up-tempo, and I'm expecting Edmonton to pull it out. I just think that right now they look to be one of the most energetic teams in this Final Four, and I'm really excited for tonight's game. And that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, we are going to continue our fantasy college football rankings and close them out by looking at the security blankets of the offense. Yes, the tight ends, and I promise not many Iowa and Utah tight ends are in this top 10. So stick around. We'll be right back to go over those rankings.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Before I get into what should be a very hype second segment of today's show, I want to remind you to leave a tip and donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is huge support to the network, me and my fellow podcasters, as always, so do consider that. We're going to stick with this one-person graphic right now to go into our second segment of today's show that I'm really excited about, continuing our fantasy college football rankings and finishing them off with the tight ends, the security blankets of the offense. Guys who are not going to be your main productions for your fantasy college football teams, but guys that you can constantly rely on to provide a certain number of points, maybe get you over the hump to win a couple more games than you were expecting. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Should be a very fun segment. Coming in at number 10 on this list is a guy from a team we've talked about a little bit on this show, Luke Haas of the Arkansas Razorbacks. Last year, he had 16 catches, 283 yards, 3 tight ends, a nice little season for a tight end. But as I was saying, looking at the Arkansas Razorbacks and looking at a quarterback in KJ Jefferson, who is in his 7th year of college football, highly experienced, knows what he's doing, I'm looking at the Arkansas Razorbacks to really have an interesting year where they're not necessarily competing in the SEC, but still being able to put up points. Obviously, they have a very experienced wide receiver core, so maybe a guy like Luke Haas loses that level of production, but with an experienced quarterback in KJ Jefferson, look for Luke Haas to be an interesting pickup that should win you a couple of games in your fantasy college football league. I'm really excited to see if KJ Jefferson and Luke Haas can still produce together, because this is KJ's last hurrah, and I really want him to be able to produce as well as this tight end Luke Haas. So I'm really excited for them. Coming in at the number 9 spot, a guy who transferred to Michigan State this past year in Jack Velling. He transfers in from Oregon State, moving with Aiden Childs, the backup QB last year for Oregon State, to Michigan State, what should be a very interesting team. Obviously, Aiden Childs was a former 5-star recruit, sat behind DJ Uyunglele last year at Oregon State, decided to move to Michigan State with his tight end, who last year had 29 catches for 438 yards and 8 TDs. So a very high-end production-wise tight end in Jack Velling right here. I think that Michigan State is going to be one of those teams who is still in this kind of stasis in the Big Ten. Obviously, with the addition of new teams from the West Coast, Michigan State is going to continue to fall further and further down the pecking order of the Big Ten. They really haven't been in the national spotlight for quite some time. However, Aiden Childs is an exciting, risky option for this Michigan State offense to rely upon. It is a crowded QB room over there at Michigan State, like I mentioned in prior episodes. So I'm really excited to see how Jack Velling and Aiden Childs, that partnership coming over from Oregon State, translate to a Michigan State team that wants to compete in the Big Ten, but really has to step up their game. So Jack Velling should be a very interesting pick production-wise in terms of fantasy college football. Coming in at number 8, we talked about his team a lot. Should be a very interesting tight end to look at. Jake Briningstool had 498 yards last year, 30 catches and 5 TDs for Clemson. Obviously, we're talking about Clemson as a team that's not going to be reliant on their passing attack as much due to the fact that they really don't know whether or not they can trust a guy like Cade Klubnik to lead this team. They really don't have that stability anymore at the QB position, but Jake Briningstool is a very interesting security blanket for them. For a wide receiver core who's really starting to try to grow into their own and help this young QB, and Bo Collins and Antonio Williams, but Jake Briningstool had a breakout year last year, 498 yards, not too shabby for a tight end last year, and a Clemson team that is still the cream of the crop in the ACC, but Florida State is going to catch up to them. Let's see how they transition. Jake Briningstool is as good a bet as any at the tight end position in terms of fantasy college football, so I'm really excited for his year up ahead. Coming in at number 7, another guy on an SEC team that I'm really thrilled to see what they can do next year, and Caden Prieskorn at the number 7 spot. Obviously, we talked a lot about Ole Miss on this podcast. Obviously, what they bring to the table with Jackson Dart, one of the best QBs in the country, probably my second or third best QB in all of the SEC. And he has a guy in Caden Prieskorn who brings that experience. Obviously, they lost Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State, but they still have that receiving core that Jackson Dart can rely upon. And they bring in a guy in Henry Paris IV from Miami to kind of elevate that offense to one of the better offenses in the entirety of college football, in my opinion. But Caden Prieskorn last year had 449 yards on 30 catches for 4 TDs. Very reliable tight end. Looking forward to seeing how this Ole Miss team adapts to the new look SEC. So look out for Caden Prieskorn on your fantasy draft boards come draft time. Coming in at the number 6 spot, a guy with big shoes to fill, transferring into Georgia in Ben Urosek. I'm really intrigued to see how he plays out over at Georgia because, like I said, he has gigantic shoes to fill after they lose Brock Bowers to the NFL. We wish Brock Bowers the best of luck there. But coming into the season, Benjamin Urosek obviously wants to be a more high-profile tight end. Last year at Stanford, where he transferred from, he had only 16 catches for 239 yards and 1 TD. So we can see the potential there, moving into a system where Carson Beck really is very comfortable with distributing the ball to all his different weapons in a wide receiver core that's not as experienced as Georgia wide receiver groups of the past. Ben Urosek should have an interesting role. Obviously, they already had Oscar Delp in the squad, so it should be interesting to see what happens with 2 tight end sets, but look for Benjamin Jurosic to have a big year, filling in for Brock Bowers in his gigantic production. So we'll see how Ben Jurosic translates into a Georgia team looking to get back into the CFP. Getting into the top 5, a very, very feel-good story right here. One of my favorite college football tight ends from Utah. I promise he's the only Utah tight end on this list, but he's a fantastic fantasy option. Brant Kuithe. A fantastic story, like I said. Obviously, he missed the entirety of last year, along with his QB, Cam Rising. And now he wants to go out with a bang, walking off into the sunset with his fellow QB, Cam Rising, with a Big 12 championship. Moving from the Pac-12 to the Big 12 is Utah this year. Should be very exhilarating for them. But let's just talk about this. Brant Kuithe, when he's playing, he's one of the best tight ends in all of college football, like I said. In 2022, the last season he played, he had 19 catches, 206 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now think about this. Both him and Rising missed last season. Obviously, very transitional year for Utah. They didn't really have that stability at the QB position that Cam Rising presents for them. So what a good story it would be, coming full circle, both of these players coming back, going out with a bang together if they win the Big 12 championship. They are one of the favorites now in the Big 12, so look for Brant Kuithe and Cam Rising to be one of the best QB tight end connections over there at Utah. Coming in at number 4, another school that produces so many tight ends in Iowa, and Luke Lachey. Obviously, Iowa, one of the great schools in terms of tight end production and transitioning to the NFL. We see it with George Kittle. We see it with Sam Laporta. We see it with so many different players. And Luke Lachey now is the top tight end right now for Iowa. Last year didn't have that big of a year. 10 catches, 131 yards, no touchdowns. But that was because he as well went down to injury. This year, he's going to really have to help this QB core, because right now Cade McNamara is out for spring practices with a torn ACL, and the only quarterback is Marco Lainez, who's never played a snap of college football for Iowa at the very least. So Luke Lachey is going to have to be a guy who immediately needs to step up his production, so look for him to be a sleeper on fantasy draft boards. A lot of people may know about him due to the fact that it's Iowa and the tight ends they produce are so fantastic. But look for him as well to be that security blanket for whoever comes out of the Iowa QB situation. Coming in at number 3 is our first group of 5 kind of representative, and RJ Maryland of the SMU Mustangs. SMU is going to be one of the most exciting group of 5 teams in my opinion. They could look to break into the 12-team college football playoff. I would not be surprised. Behind the play of a guy in Preston Stone who came out of high school, the class of 2021, as a 5-star recruit, obviously picking SMU over other schools. Last year, he had 3,197 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. So Preston Stone, look for him to connect with RJ Maryland a lot, who had 518 yards last year, the most of probably anyone on this list going forward, and 7 TDs off 34 catches. So I really like this SMU team, especially the fact that Preston Stone is now progressing, going into his senior year. I'm really excited to see what this connection brings. And look for RJ Maryland to be another one of those guys who's a fantasy steal for you just because of the yards he produces at the tight end spot. Coming in at number 2, our second group of 5 representative here on a much more low-key group of 5 team in Harold Fannin of Bowling Green. Now, Bowling Green is one of those teams that really is in like a weird stasis where they want to compete, but they're definitely not one of the prominent group of 5 programs that's going to be in the top 25 this year. They do have a guy who's been a very experienced QB, and Connor Bazelak, journeyman kind of guy, but he's never really had a consistent season. However, that is not the case for his tight end, Harold Fannin. 623 receiving yards at the tight end position. Not too bad if I say so myself. 6 touchdowns, 44 catches. Look for him to be one of those guys that Connor Bazelak looks to a lot. He's not going to have that many yards at the QB position, Bazelak, but Harold Fannin is one of the best security blankets in the country, and he's not a high-profile name, so I can see him dropping in fantasy college football drafts, so I'm really thrilled to see how that shapes out for you guys come draft time. But coming in at the number 1 position, another interesting story with an intriguing storyline behind it, Oronde Gadsden of the Syracuse Orange. Now, Oronde Gadsden, like I said, has a miraculous story. He has literally played almost every position in this Syracuse offense over the past year, whether it be at slot receiver, outside receiver, and now we see him at the tight end position. But unfortunately, last year, much like Brant Keithy, his junior year was cut short by a Liz Frank injury, and he only had 7 catches for 67 yards last year. But coming into his senior year of college, he had a connection with Garrett Schrader that was one of the best in the country, one of the best receiving tight ends in college football. And now we have a guy transferring in Kyle McCord, kind of a shock transfer, who has the experience of throwing to a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., another very versatile player. So look for that connection to be one of the best in the country. Look for Kyle McCord to not necessarily find his new Marvin Harrison Jr. in Gadsden, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is a generational wide receiver rather. But Oronde Gadsden deserves number 1 because he's been doing it for so long, and I'm really interested to see how he translates with Kyle McCord and their connection as well. But that should just about do it for my top 10 rankings in terms of fantasy college football. It was really exciting to do these segments with you guys. But coming up next on the show, another sport is making its fantasy sports podcast debut. The beautiful game of football, not soccer, makes its much anticipated debut. We'll be looking at the Euros betting odds in terms of football coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And I must say, this segment for me is very special because I'm making a huge risk here in terms of presenting this sport to you on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. It is my favorite sport in the entire world, and most people outside of America's at least favorite sport, the beautiful game of football. I am so thrilled and happy that I'm able to present this to you guys. We're going to be looking at the betting odds for the top 10 favorites for the upcoming Euros tournament taking place in Germany. So, without further ado, let's get right into this segment. I'm so happy that I get to do this with you guys. And let's just pull this up right now and get right into it. Starting off, with a team at number 10 that I've really appreciated over the past years as a soccer fan. Just seeing their growth and this golden generation proved to be one of the most exhilarating in all of sports. A feel-good story at the number 10 spot for this upcoming Euros in Germany. The Croatians. Now, the Croatians, over the past couple of years, have proven that a small country can really come together and make magic happen. 2 semi-final appearances in the past 4 tournaments for this Croatia team, and it's mainly down to a midfield maestro in Luka Modric, who is an ageless wonder. He's been doing it for so many years, but now in this tournament specifically, I'm really interested to see how Croatia begins to transition from a guy like Luka Modric, who has been so reliable over these past couple of years, to a team that should get younger. Obviously, we can see that in their back line. Josko Gvardiol is already becoming one of the best defenders in the world, so versatile in his first season at Man City, becoming one of Pep's most integral players in that back line. But he's in a back line with a guy in Domagoj Vida, who was also of that golden generation in one of his last tournaments. So I'm really looking at Croatia to be one of the sentimental favorites, but I'm fading this Croatia team just because of the talent and youth in this tournament specifically. But if you do want to go for the sentimental favorite in this tournament at plus 4,000 for Croatia, by all means, I wouldn't be mad if you put all your chickens into the basket of, or eggs into the basket of Croatia, because of the fact that they have made magic happen. They have been miracle workers in this tournament. And it's their last hurrah with Luka Modric, so look for them to maybe surprise again. Coming in at the number 9 spot, we have another kind of underdog story in Denmark. Now, this is a very emotional squad, mainly due to the fact that this is the first tournament that their own midfield master, Christian Eriksen, will play after suffering a cardiac arrest at the last Euros. So obviously, there is going to be a ton of emotion and that underdog mentality surrounding this team because of the fact that they are playing for Christian Eriksen. This team does not have that many known faces. They have a goalie in Kasper Schmeichel, who has been one of the best international goalies over the past couple of years. And they have guys like Pierre-Emil Højbjerg in their midfield, and a young guy in Rasmus Højlund, who wants to make that transfer to be the top premier striker, one of the top premier strikers in world football. But ultimately, this is a Denmark team coming off a very disappointing 2022 World Cup, where they were out in the group stages, is looking to ride that wave of momentum and emotion that they had in the previous Euros, where they went all the way to the semi-finals, to the top again. And I really like this team. I think I'm going to fade them, though, at 3,500. There really isn't that much value. I think that they will struggle yet again in this tournament. But I really do like this team, and I hope that they can pull through for Christian Eriksen and at least get to the latter stages of this tournament. Coming in at number 8, probably one of the best backlines in world football, in my opinion, with a lot of interesting players in the Netherlands. I think the Netherlands, like I said, are a squad that is so well structured and defensively and offensively as well, although there are a lot of questions surrounding whether or not a guy like Memphis Depay can still be a top striker for a team that wants to be a tournament favorite. I'm really high on this Netherlands team, though, mainly because of, like I said, their back line. They have 2 of the best center backs in world football in Virgil van Dijk and Matthijs de Ligt. I think that one of the big questions in terms of defense is who their goalie will be. Last tournament in 2022 World Cup, they relied upon Andries Noppert of Heerenveen as kind of surprise pick for that goaltending spot. But I kind of want to see how this team that really hasn't had a prominent goaltender will translate to a tournament where they are expected to be one of those teams that can make a push at least to the semifinals, in my opinion. They are a well-structured team, but right now I think at 1,600 they are interesting value, mainly because of the fact that they have one of the strongest defenses in the entire tournament. Coming in at number 7 is our defending Euro champions in Italy. This is definitely a squad in transition, mainly due to the fact that they lose their stalwarts at the defensive backline in Leonardo Bonucci and Giorgio Chiellini. kind of this Juventus to Inter transfer from their back line. We now see all Inter back line to my understanding, where you see Leonardo Bonucci and Giorgio Chiellini exit, and guys like Alessandro Bastoni and Fede De Marco, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated left backs in world football, come into this squad. And also another exciting player makes his second tournament appearance for Italy in Federico Chiesa, one of the best wingers on his day when he's fully fit, one of the best players at the last Euros, a huge part of why Italy won this Euros. But in my opinion, they are a kind of team where they're kind of losing their glory a little bit, because they're kind of a team that I really respect due to the fact that they have a squad that wants to get younger. They want to transition from the Chiellini-Bonucci era to an era where you can get more exciting players in your back line. They do have one of the most exciting young goalkeepers in world football in Gianluigi Donnarumma. I think that ultimately, though, at 7 is the best value for this squad. I think that they could reach the semifinals, but I see them going out in the quarterfinals at best. At plus 1600, though, they are kind of a good value in my opinion, and be sure to look out for a lot of Italian players to try and make their impact. Like I said, Federico Chiesa will always be good in tournament-style football. Guys like Domenico Berardi, Manuel Locatelli. I honestly believe that Italy, while not necessarily at the level they were in 2020, they certainly can be a very entertaining side to watch. Coming in at number 6 in terms of betting odds is another squad that's kind of past its golden generation. Their window is closing rapidly, and a side that I would fade immediately at plus 1400 is Belgium. Obviously, they still have Kevin De Bruyne in their midfield, and a midfield with Kevin De Bruyne is exponentially better, but they don't really have any more of their high-profile stars like Eden Hazard. He's gone from the team, and now they're kind of in this weird place where you have like these young guys coming into the squad like Leandro Trossard and Axel Witsel and Timothy Castagna, but they really aren't a team that scares me, really. When I look at the teams above them in these rankings, they are teams that have like very creative attacking players, and right now Belgium really only has that one guy carrying over from the golden generation to a new generation of Belgian football in Kevin De Bruyne. That being said, I do think they have certain talents like Trossard, who had a great year domestically this year at Arsenal. And Axel Witsel is a very underrated defender / midfield hybrid player. So I really think that Belgium is one of those squads that's kind of weird. I wouldn't place all my eggs in one basket concerning Belgium in terms of betting, but I still think that they can make noise. They are a knockout stage team in my opinion. I don't expect them to go out in the group stage, but I think they will fall in the round of 16. So fade Belgium, and let's just see how this new look Belgian squad can build around a player of Kevin De Bruyne's caliber, and we'll see with them. Coming up next, though, is a team I'm very high on, and are a dark horse in this tournament, and one of the most technically gifted squads in the entire tournament, in my humble opinion, with Portugal. Portugal is going to be a squad to watch out for in this tournament. They have a player in Bernardo Silva, a wizard on the wing, can cut inside, one of the best cut-and-shoot players in the world, one of the most technically gifted players in the world, such a joy to watch at Manchester City, a team that everyone hates, but I can't hate a player like Bernardo Silva. Also in the midfield, Bruno Fenge, a very controversial player because he has the technicality and flair of a very creative attacking midfielder, but he doesn't necessarily put it all together, especially domestically, but internationally he is one of the most intriguing players in world football. And obviously we can't talk about Portugal without talking about Cristiano Ronaldo. Even though he's one of those players who you love to hate, he is still one of the best players in world football over at Saudi Arabia. Coming into this Portugal squad for a tournament that may be his last. He honestly has mentioned that he wants to play in the upcoming World Cup in the USA. But I still think that Cristiano Ronaldo in this Portugal team can work. They also have one of the best defenders in the world, one of the best back lines in the world, with Ruben Dias and Pepe, one of the oldest defenders in the world right now, still doing his thing. So Portugal, I'm very high on at plus 800. They are a very interesting value pick for me to win the whole competition. But getting into the top 4 right now are 4 exciting teams who I think are the best in the world and the cream of the crop considering this tournament. Coming in at number 4 are the Spaniards at plus 700. The Spanish are a squad that always is one of the most entertaining, exhilarating squads to watch in the world. They really play some beautiful brands of football. However, they are kind of transitioning from that, but they still have that kind of mix of youth and experience coming through their ranks that I'm really excited to see in this tournament. Looking at some of their youthful players, they have 2 fantastic midfielders in Pedri and Gavi, who are really creative assets to this team. They bring in a young teen in Lamine Yamal, making his national team debut for the Spanish, who's a very exciting winger for Barcelona. I would love to see him progress at Barcelona. I'm really excited to see him make his national team debut and tournament debut. But they also have experience in the positions. Obviously, looking at the attack is where all the question marks are going to be because they haven't had an established striker in quite some time. So looking at this attack, you have guys like Dani Olmo on the wing, a very exciting winger. But also, you have a very questionable striker who to rely upon, Alvaro Morata, who domestically and internationally has really struggled to score and produce goals for the Spanish side, who really wants to have a nice possession-based style of football implemented. But overall, looking at this Spanish side, I can see why they are ranked this highly in terms of betting odds at plus 700. I think that they can make a nice little run to the quarterfinals. I don't think they can make it to the semifinals because these top 3 teams are, in my opinion, better than them. But I still think they're an interesting value pick in terms of betting odds. Coming in at number 3, my favorite team in the world, one of my favorite teams to talk about as well, the German squad, the host country for this Euros tournament. Now, like I said, with Germany, this is a very interesting story. Obviously, they bring in a high-profile manager in Julian Nagelsmann, who, while is one of the most exciting young managers in world football, is a guy who is very ambitious and wants to create an ambitious atmosphere for this squad. But looking at Germany, a team that has been in turmoil, although the past 2 games they have showed some promise and purpose, all I want out of a German squad is to see unity. Obviously, Julian Nagelsmann is taking some risks with the squad, bringing in Toni Kroos for his what could be one of his last international tournaments, and a guy in Robert Andrich from Bayer Leverkusen, who he's making his national team debut, and he's mixing them in with young midfielders in Jamal Musiala and Florian Wirtz. I'm really interested to see how this whole German thing plays out. However, what I'm looking for out of Germany is a sense of unity within this team, because they have really lacked identity over the past couple of tournaments, failing to make it out of the group stages in most of them. And so what I really want to see is if Julian Nagelsmann reels his ambition, just allows Germany to have that freedom, that looseness that they had when Jogi Löw was coaching them in 2014. And I just really am hopeful for this German squad. Obviously, they really need to have a deep run in this tournament, and I see them as one of the favorites in this tournament because they have just so many creative, talented players who can pull through, but I just want to see it happen for them at plus 600 at high value. Overall, I think they have the players and the manager to win this tournament, but they just need to trust themselves again. Coming in at number 2, though, a team who a lot of people say their B team could play in any tournament and win it, France. They just have so many talented players at every single position group. Obviously, when you have a guy like Kylian Mbappe in your squad, you're immediately one of the best teams in the world. But also looking at the way they've managed to create a squad where anyone can play anywhere. Obviously, you see with guys like Aurelion Chouameni and Eduardo Camavinga coming into this squad, these young players who have proven to be very versatile domestically and internationally as well. Honestly, there are some questions in their back line with a guy like Deo Upamecano, who has had his struggles domestically, and Jules Koyunde and Benjamin Pavard. But internationally, however, they have proven that they can be some of the best in the world. Obviously, you have a guy like Olivier Giroud still doing his thing at the striker position, one of the best international strikers of all time, and a guy in Antoine Griezmann who's always a pesky player, whether it be domestically for Barcelona and Atletico Madrid or internationally. So I think this France squad, as always, is very dangerous at plus 340 in the betting odds. They're one of the safest bets to win this tournament. However, the team at number one, I think, deservedly is the favorite of this tournament, and that is the Englishmen, the Three Lions. Now, a lot of people have been waiting for England to break through. They've seen this such talented roster fail to win anything. They were so close at the 2020 Euros, falling on penalties to Italy, and ultimately, I think that this squad right now is the best in the world, though. You have players at every position, young and old, experienced and inexperienced, making their national team debut or have been doing this for years. Obviously, you have the best striker in the world in Harry Kane up top. You have Phil Foden on the wing after one of his best domestic seasons. You have a player in Kyle Walker at right back, who's one of the fastest players in the world, one of the best recovery. Two center backs who are much maligned and controversial picks in Harry Maguire and John Stones, who just deliver for you on the international level. You have midfield talents now in Declan Rice, one of the best midfielders in the world, moving from West Ham to Arsenal this year. A fantastic season for him. And young players as well in Kobbie Mainoo, who looked like an established star at Man United already. And Cole Palmer, Cole Palmer, making a stunning move from Man City to Chelsea, one of the signings of the season for Chelsea and a reason why they are in Europe. But when I look at this England squad, I really think that they are the squad to really overtake France now as Europe's best side. They are starting to become a team that also can have their B team go out in the pitch and win games. So I'm really excited and thrilled that England are one of these teams now looking to break through, win their first major tournament in such a long time, over 56 years of hurt. Never stopped me breathing. England, look for them to be at least a finalist in this year's tournament. That's my bold prediction, sitting at plus 300. Another safe, fantastic bet if you are looking to bet on the Euros. That should just about do it. It was my pleasure to bring to you a segment about the beautiful game making its debut on my podcast. But coming up next, we are making another debut with a sport in the WNBA, specifically the Rookie of the Year debate between number 1 and number 2 picks, Caitlin Clark and Cameron Brink. Should be a very intriguing segment. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available.
Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. For today's fourth segment of the show, we are going to make another debut of a sport with the WNBA, specifically speaking of the Rookie of the Year debate between number 1 pick and number 2 pick, Caitlin Clark and Cameron Brink. Obviously, two fantastic college players making a rocky transition to the WNBA. But let's start off with Caitlin Clark because of the fact that she has had such an illustrious career in college at the University of Iowa, over 3,000 points scored. Now with the Indiana Fever, a team obviously who is not that good in the WNBA, finding out the hard way the transition to the WNBA is not as easy as it looks, but still, she is sitting pretty as the favorite for the Rookie of the Year debate over Cameron Brink right now at minus 650 according to ESPN BET. But let's look at her stats this season because they tell a story that she has the traits and the capabilities to be one of the dominant point guards in this league, but she just needs to acclimate to the league because this obviously is her rookie season. So much was expected of her. But right now, she's not where she wants to be. She's only shooting 37.1% from the field, averaging 15.4 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 6.3 assists. So you can see the talent is there, but it's not translating to team success. Obviously, the Fever only 1-8. She did have a solid game against the Sparks team that Cameron Brink plays for on Tuesday. Had 30 points there, but it's a matter of translating her game from the college level to the WNBA for Caitlin Clark, and I think that she is a deserved favorite for the Rookie of the Year award just based on the fact that they value points more than anything in that kind of race. So I do think she's the favorite, but let's talk about Cameron Brink, a completely different kind of player profile. Only 3 points in their meeting on Tuesday of this week, and 1 of 5 field goals. However, Cameron Brink, while not the biggest point scorer, obviously she's not a point guard and expected to rally this team around her talents. She leads the league in blocks per game. She obviously takes fewer field goals than Caitlin Clark, but she still has 10.8 points per game, not too bad for a center in the WNBA. But let's talk about how this race matches up with, say, other races that we've seen in Rookie of the Year conversations. These are just two completely different players. You have Caitlin Clark, a player who has so much pressure put on her back to kind of elevate this Indiana Fever team that has been lacking a superstar for quite some time, and it's showing in her style of play, but she still is this very talented player who, if given the assets and the tools to elevate the Fever like she did with the University of Iowa in college, she could be one of the phases of the league in the next decade or so. Whereas Cameron Brink is more of a defensive-minded player. She's not a point scorer. She's going to get you the rim protection. She's going to get you blocks. She's going to get you paint dominance. Now, I think that ultimately Caitlin Clark is the safest bet for this kind of award because of the fact that you want a high-profile point guard, shooting guard kind of player to win an award. She's going to get her points. She's going to find her way with the Indiana Fever eventually. They are going to win some games this year. They're not necessarily going to win a lot of games. They're not by a long stretch a playoff team by any means, in my opinion. But she is going to find her way. I just think she needs time. Obviously, people are just going to put more and more pressure on her shoulders as the Fever lose more and more games. But she's proving, what with her performances these past couple of weeks, that she has it in her to perform at a high level. Whereas Cameron Brink, not much is expected of her for a Sparks team that also is in kind of a transition but does have better players than Cameron Brink to build around. They have De'Erica Hamby, they have Kia Nurse, two solid players in their squad, two foundational players that Cameron Brink at this current moment is not better than, is not expected to be better than, but she still is in this conversation mainly due to the fact that there aren't that many solid defensive Rookie of the Year candidates right now in this WNBA league. And so Cameron Brink, yes, she's not averaging as many points as Caitlin Clark, but that's to be expected. Cameron Brink is not that kind of player. This is just such a weird debate when we debate a point guard who had such a fantastic career in college against a center who had a similar trajectory to this point guard, but is not expected to score as many points as her. And so, looking at this debate, while Caitlin Clark is a safe bet, Cameron Brink proves to be the more intriguing option here. Because while points are certainly very important in the league, and obviously having a good point guard matters, defense also matters as well. And Cameron Brink is proving to be one of the best defensive players in the WNBA right now. So ultimately, I do think Caitlin Clark should and will win this award. I just think that when the pressure is off her, when the dust settles, and she finally gets her flowers for fighting her way through this season, a tough season for the Indiana Fever and herself, I think that people will really appreciate her more for what she did. But Cameron Brink, you can't look past the fact that she is such an athletic player defensively, and in terms of her paint presence, her rim protection. She also is an intriguing option. But that should just about do it for this segment. I was really excited to talk about this kind of interesting debate where you have a point guard and center, and it gets really intriguing whether you value offense or defense more. But coming up in our last segment of today's show, we talk about the ass whooping that the Mavs gave the Wolves to get into the finals of the NBA. We recap the fantasy points that these players had, and that will just about finish out our show. We will be right back for that segment. Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are at the last segment of today's show, and it should be a very, very intriguing one because of the fact that we are talking about the Wolves Mavs. And to paraphrase one of the other hosts in the GSMC network, Nelson, who is our resident basketball expert, this was a belt-to-ass performance brought to you by the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic, I think he's the best player in the world right now. Obviously, he hasn't won a championship just yet, but who cares, because of the fact that when the ball is in his hands, he can make magic happen. And combined with Kyrie Irving, they are one of the dominant duos in this sport. Let's talk about Luka's stats last night, both in game time and in fantasy. 36, 10, and 5 in 37 minutes. 57.5 fantasy points if he was on your roster. Congratulations. 124.8 fantasy points in the last two games. Just an incredibly dominant performance again from Luka Doncic. And Kyrie Irving as well. He had 48.3 fantasy points for himself, 36, 5, and 4 stat line. And this duo right now is the reason why the Dallas Mavericks have made it this far. Obviously, coming into this kind of crapshoot of a Western Conference Finals tournament, the Dallas Mavericks really kind of had to transition their game from a Luka and Kyrie centric game to a more team game, but that does not mean that their production waned. They become this dominant duo because of the fact that Dallas is willing to build around them, and as we've seen through their demolition of all these teams in the Western Conference, the fact that the Dallas Mavericks are willing to do whatever it takes to get to the NBA Finals and potentially win an NBA championship for Luka Doncic and Kyrie again. An interesting stat that I found out this morning is that Luka and Kyrie are only the second duo behind Elgin Baylor and Jerry West to have 3 dual 30-point outings in the same series. That just goes to show their amount of offensive production for this Dallas Mavericks team. But 2 other players who we've also highlighted on this channel need to get their due respect in their ability to be some of the better role players surrounding Luka and Kyrie in this series and this postseason. Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, both 3 of 3 for field goals. I believe Daniel Gafford was perfect in terms of field goal percentage and field goal shooting in this series. So what an incredible asset they are. Also because of the fact that they are able to have not only offensive output, but defensive output as well. They are going to be 2 guys in this NBA Finals that will create that intriguing match between them and Kristaps Porzingis down low. But we are focusing on this game as well, and we also have to focus on the Minnesota Timberwolves side of things. In my honest opinion, they just ran out of gas. Honestly, even though Kat and Anthony Edwards did have their points, they got their point production there. I think that they just were too tired, and ultimately the team that was around them kind of gave up. They knew their time was up, and they allowed Luka and Kyrie to suck the energy out of that arena. Obviously, Minnesota fans really wanted to see their team make this a series, but the fact of the matter is they just found no way to combat Luka and Kyrie, and that is why they are eliminated. But congratulations to them. I think that they are going to be a young up-and-coming team that will continue to progress, continue to make more conference finals, if not NBA finals, in the very near future. But looking ahead kind of to this final series, because this offers so many different storylines, diverse storylines, intersecting. Kyrie looking to beat his former team, make sure that banner number 18 does not hang in TD Garden. Luka Doncic looking to cement himself as the best player in the world. The Boston Celtics looking to cement themselves as one of the best teams in NBA history. Obviously, they've had a fantastic net rating. They've had a fantastic defensive rating, just a well-rounded team. Jason Tatum looking to dispel the notion that he cannot perform in clutch time, in clutch series. Jaylen Brown looking to continue his fantastic run through this postseason. And Drew Holiday and Derek White looking to prove that they are 2 of the best defenders in the league. Drew Holiday looking to prove that he was one of the better acquisitions of this season, along with Kristaps Porzingis returning to the Celtics lineup. Look for him to be a very interesting player to follow throughout this series to see if he can hold up in real game time in what should be a very intriguing defensive matchup, like I said, between himself and Derek Lively and Dan Gafford. I think this is going to be a much more fantastic, interesting series than people think. I don't think that the Celtics are completely out of the water yet. Yes, they have proved that when their backs are against the wall, like we saw in the Indiana series, where they were down in 3 of the 4 games they won, that they can come back and steal some games. But like I said, they haven't necessarily been challenged as much as they will be by the Dallas Mavericks duo of Luka and Kyrie. They did not face Tyrese Halliburton for most of the Indiana series. They did not face Donovan Mitchell for most of the Cavs series. And they did not face Jimmy Butler for most of the Heat series. So this is the first time they are truly being tested by the Mavs and their fantastic duo. But I think what separates these 2 teams is the fact that the Celtics have so much versatility and length defensively that no matter who switches onto Luka and Kyrie, they will make sure that they have a tough matchup that will make Luka and Kyrie's lives much harder. I think that the Davs are going to have to rely upon their role players to get more offensive production, because it can't all be Luka and Kyrie in this series. I think that the Celtics' defensive prowess will be able to carry them over the edge in this series, but look for Luka and Kyrie to continue to put up the points that they have. But that will just about do it for today's show. I was really excited to introduce all these new sports, these new topics to you guys. I really hope you enjoy this show. It was really exciting to do. Come back next week where I'll talk more about IDP rankings. We'll make their triumphant return to this podcast. And also looking at some more fantasy college football and some of the breakout players who I think will have big seasons there. But that will just about do it for today's show. My name is Christopher Sheppard. As always, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Leave a tip and donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will be back next week, better than ever.